On June 21, 2008, a humid Saturday afternoon at Old Bridge Township Raceway Park in Englishtown, New Jersey, the National Hot Rod Association's Super Nationals became the scene of one of the most tragic events in professional motorsports. At nearly 300 miles per hour, Catastrophic struck Scott Kalitta's Funny Car, setting in motion a series of catastrophic failures that would ultimately reshape the entire sport of drag racing. This wasn't simply an accident. It was a cascade of mechanical breakdowns, each compounding the next, that would expose critical vulnerabilities in a sport that had pushed technology and human courage to the absolute limits. But before we understand what happened that fateful day, we must first understand Scott Kalitta himself, a man born into drag racing legend. Scott Kalitta came from drag racing royalty. His father, Connie Kalitta, known throughout the motorsports world as the Bounty Hunter, was a living legend who dominated professional drag racing for decades. Connie Kalitta was a 5-time World Championship team owner, an 8-time national event winner, and a driver who had competed at the highest levels from 1963 through the 1990s. He set world speed records, beat legends like Don Garlits and Snake Prudhomme, and founded Kalitta Motorsports, one of the most successful drag racing organizations in history. Scott inherited his father's fierce competitive spirit, his unrelenting drive to win, and his passion for the sport. From the moment he began racing in 1982, ironically at the very same Englishtown track where his career would end, Scott proved he belonged among drag racing's elite. His early victories were impressive, but they became extraordinary once he moved to Top Fuel in the early 1990s. In 1994, at the peak of his competitive powers, he won his first NHRA Top Fuel World Championship, becoming the first driver to win 4 consecutive races that season. The next year, he dominated again, winning his second consecutive championship in 1995. By the time of his death, Scott Kalitta had accumulated 18 career victories, with 17 in Top Fuel and 1 in Funny Car, making him one of only 18 drivers in NHRA history to win races in both categories. He was 46 years old. To truly comprehend what happened to Scott Kalitta, one must first understand the machines he piloted, vehicles that represent the absolute pinnacle of automotive engineering and the farthest reaches of human tolerance. Top Fuel dragsters and funny cars are not traditional race cars. They are engineering marvels that defy conventional automotive logic. These machines accelerate from a complete stop to 300 miles per hour in 3.7 to 3.8 seconds. That acceleration generates forces of up to 4 Gs at the moment of launch, enough to compress your internal organs and blur your vision. Their engines produce approximately 10,000 horsepower from just 500 cubic inches of displacement. To achieve this, they burn a fuel called nitromethane at an astonishing rate, approximately 4 liters per second. Nitromethane is inherently volatile, chemically similar to TNT explosive compounds, and contains its own oxidizer within its molecular structure. This means the fuel burns explosively, and any disruption in the combustion process, any backfire, any uncontrolled explosion, can be catastrophic. The engine is mated to a single-speed transmission with a centrifugal clutch that locks immediately upon throttle application, sending all that horsepower directly to 175-inch rear tires. As the car accelerates, centrifugal force expands these tires to 38 inches in diameter. The supercharger alone consumes approximately 1,000 horsepower just to compress air into the cylinders at pressures between 60 and 65 psi. It's held to the engine block with Kevlar belts to prevent it from launching into the grandstands in case of an explosion. The driver sits in the middle of this controlled fury, exposed to noise levels exceeding 150 decibels, louder than a jet engine, experiencing accelerations that the human body was never designed to withstand. The 2008 Lucas Oil NHRA Super Nationals at Old Bridge Township Raceway Park in Englishtown, New Jersey, was one of drag racing's most prestigious annual events. Professional racers from across the country came to compete for position, prestige, and prize money. Scott Kalitta arrived as an experienced competitor with decades of combined experience between his own career and his family's legacy. He came with a specific objective: to secure a competitive position during qualifying to ensure favorable seeding for the next day's elimination rounds. The weather that Saturday was humid and warm, typical early summer conditions in New Jersey. The track was prepared to racing standards, lane conditions checked, safety protocols in place. No one anticipated that this would be anything other than a routine qualifying event. Saturday afternoon, around 3 p.m., Scott Kalitta prepared for his fourth and final qualifying attempt of the day. He climbed into his DHL-sponsored Toyota Solara Funny Car, a vehicle painted in brilliant racing colors, a machine specifically designed and engineered to exceed 300 miles per hour in under 4 seconds. He underwent the ritual that every professional drag racer performs: final safety checks, mental preparation, focus. His crew chief reviewed data from previous runs. His wife and family were watching. Kalitta had spent his entire career building to moments like this, moments where every element aligned, where preparation and skill and courage merged into peak performance. The car was staged at the starting line, positioned in its lane. The engine was running, winding up to operating temperature. In the opposing lane, another competitor prepared for their run. The electronic timing system waited. The moment approached when Kalitta would launch his machine down the 1,320-foot track, a quarter-mile of asphalt and controlled chaos. The light changed. Kalitta launched hard, the supercharger winding up immediately, the transmission's centrifugal clutch locking with a mechanical engagement that fed all 10,000 horsepower to the rear wheels. The acceleration slammed him back into his seat. 4 Gs of force, then more, pressing him against his safety harness as the car rocketed down the track at speeds that would kill an unprotected human in milliseconds. The noise was deafening, 150 decibels of pure mechanical violence, a sound that carries the raw power of controlled explosions, happening 42 times per second in the engine's cylinders. The front wheels lifted off the track immediately, the downforce from the rear wing insufficient at lower speeds, the raw acceleration bucking the front end skyward. Spectators watched the fire-breathing machine charge down the track. Cameras tracked its progress. This was what they came for: the raw spectacle of human courage and engineering achievement merging into a blur of speed and sound. Then, approximately 1,000 feet down the track, just as Kalitta approached the finish line at nearly 300 miles per hour, disaster struck. The engine detonated. Not a simple mechanical failure, an explosion. The nitromethane fuel, under extreme pressure and temperature in the engine's cylinders, experienced a catastrophic combustion event. Depending on the exact failure mode, whether it was valve float, spark plug degradation, fuel system pressure fluctuation, or mechanical stress, the combustion process became uncontrolled. The explosion was violent enough to separate most of the car's body from its chassis. It generated a fireball that engulfed the vehicle, but this was only the beginning of a perfect storm of cascading failures, each one compounding the next into an unstoppable sequence. The explosion's heat and force damaged the parachute deployment system. Kalitta's funny car was equipped with dual parachutes, sophisticated braking systems that normally deploy automatically through a mechanical linkage when a driver pulls a lever or when systems detect the need for emergency braking. These parachutes, when fully deployed, generate approximately 7 Gs of deceleration, forces powerful enough to slow a 3,000-pound machine from extreme speeds. But they require functional deployment mechanisms. The explosion damaged this system. The parachutes did not properly blossom, did not fully extend. Instead of providing critical braking force, they remained partially deployed or ineffective. Simultaneously, the explosion had locked the clutch system in the fully engaged position. This mechanical engagement meant that despite the catastrophic engine failure, despite the mechanical components being damaged and broken, power continued feeding to the rear wheels. The car was still being driven forward. Data recovered from the vehicle's onboard accelerometer showed that the engine continued to fire during the shutdown area. Proof that the locked clutch and operational portions of the engine were still providing forward thrust. Telemetry painted a picture of a machine that should have been slowing down but was instead being actively propelled down the track. Meanwhile, Kalitta was fighting with everything he had. New Jersey State Police accident investigators later noted that evidence showed he had applied mechanical braking throughout the shutdown area. Steering inputs indicated he was maintaining directional control, fighting the machine, desperately attempting to slow it down and keep it on the track. His training, his instincts, his will, all of it was being applied. But physics doesn't negotiate. The shutdown area at Englishtown was approximately 2,235 feet long, the zone designed to absorb the momentum of runaway race cars and bring them to a safe stop. Kalitta's Funny Car, still being driven by its locked transmission despite its damaged engine, still traveling at phenomenal speeds, continued down this area at over 200 miles per hour, then 150, then 125. Despite the parachute's attempts to slow it, despite his mechanical braking efforts, despite everything, the car continued forward with momentum born from 10,000 horsepower and nearly 300 miles per hour of initial velocity. The car plowed through the sand trap positioned at the end of the racing surface, sand designed to slow runaway vehicles. The sand should have absorbed momentum. It didn't. The vehicle continued. A catch net, positioned to stop exactly this type of emergency, attempted to ensnare the car. It failed. The vehicle's momentum was too great. It breached the concrete retaining wall that was supposed to be the final barrier. The wall was designed to stop runaway race cars, but Kalitta's machine still possessed too much speed, too much force. And beyond that wall, beyond where equipment should never have been positioned, was a piece of heavy camera equipment. A boom crane operated by ESPN's television crew, positioned to capture footage of the race. In that instant, everything changed. The collision was catastrophic. The impact forces exceeded 100 Gs, with some acceleration spikes approaching or exceeding 200 Gs, forces that no human body can survive. The vehicle was destroyed. The largest portion of the race car came to rest 250 feet south of the shutdown area, in a grassy area outside the track's designated safety zone. Rescue crews immediately responded. Kalitta was extracted from the wreckage and rushed to Raritan Bay Medical Center. He was pronounced dead on arrival. The blunt force trauma from the collision had caused unsurvivable injuries. The NHRA and New Jersey State Police immediately launched simultaneous investigations. What emerged from the wreckage and the telemetry data was a clear picture of catastrophic failure. The investigations determined that the engine had suffered a sudden catastrophic internal failure. Not operator error, not setup negligence, but metal meeting its absolute stress limit. The parachute system, damaged by the explosion's force and heat, had failed to deploy properly. The clutch system remained engaged throughout the emergency braking sequence, meaning active engine power continued driving the car forward even as Kalitta desperately applied mechanical brakes. The perfect storm of these failures, each one individually manageable but combined into an impossible scenario, had created the conditions for tragedy. The NHRA's investigation also revealed something that many drivers had been quietly concerned about for years. The track's runway, while adequate for most circumstances, was insufficient for the evolving speeds of modern drag racing. The shutdown area simply wasn't long enough to accommodate a car that was still being actively driven down the track by a locked clutch, while damaged parachutes failed to provide braking. It was a wake-up call that resonated through the entire sport. 3 weeks after Scott Kalitta's death, on July 11, 2008, the NHRA made a decision so unprecedented that it shook the foundations of professional drag racing. The governing body announced that the racing distance for top fuel and funny car classes would be permanently shortened from the traditional quarter mile, 1,320 feet, to 1,000 feet. This reduction of 320 feet would mean slightly lower top speeds by the finish line and, more importantly, significantly more shutdown area for emergency braking. The extra distance could mean the difference between a controlled stop and a catastrophic crash. This wasn't a temporary measure or an emergency fix. This was permanent. This was the NHRA saying that tradition, no matter how sacred, must yield to safety. The decision was immediately controversial. Purists argued that drag racing's identity was built on the quarter-mile distance, a standard that had existed since the very origins of organized drag racing in the 1950s. Some fans claimed it wouldn't be real drag racing anymore. But the NHRA held firm, and the decision received support from the racing community itself. Kenny Bernstein, president of the Professional Racers Owners Organization, released a statement acknowledging that this represented a fundamental change in drag racing history, but that safety must come first. The legendary Don Garlits, who had survived his own catastrophic accident in 1970 that led to revolutionary safety innovations, declared his full support for the distance reduction. The new distance was implemented immediately, taking effect at the Mopar Mile High Nationals in Denver just weeks later. The quarter-mile era of modern drag racing was over, but shortening the track alone couldn't eliminate the underlying cause: engine backfires and explosions. The NHRA knew this and sought a technical solution. Enter Dave Leahy of Electromotion in Columbus, Ohio. Leahy wasn't working alone. He partnered with some of the greatest drivers in drag racing history: John Force, a 15-time Funny Car world champion who has competed at the highest levels for decades; Kenny Bernstein, a 4-time Funny Car champion and 2-time Top Fuel champion; and Tony Schumacher, who would go on to become one of the most successful Top Fuel drivers ever with multiple world championships. Together, this team of engineers and legendary competitors developed something revolutionary: an onboard sensor system that constantly monitors a dragster or funny car's engine. This sensor detects backfires, burst panels, and any indication of engine failure or explosion. When such an event is detected, the sensor automatically takes action. It shuts off the fuel pump, cutting off the engine's power source, and simultaneously deploys the parachutes. The driver no longer has to react. The system does it instantly, removing precious milliseconds of delay. This technology, born directly from Scott Kalitta's accident, was made mandatory in 2009. Since implementation, it's estimated to have prevented countless potential disasters and saved multiple lives. The sensor technology addresses exactly the type of scenario that killed Kalitta: an engine explosion leading to parachute deployment failure. With the automated system, the fuel pump shuts down and parachutes deploy whether the driver can react or not. Beyond the distance reduction and the sensor technology, comprehensive safety improvements spread throughout professional drag racing. The NHRA installed heavily padded retaining walls at the end of sand traps, walls capable of withstanding impacts from vehicles traveling at speeds exceeding 300 miles per hour. These padded walls replaced the old rubber polymer safety nets that were held up with concrete posts, which had proven inadequate. Track design itself was fundamentally reconsidered. Catch net anchors were buried underground with no obstructing posts, eliminating the possibility of a runaway car catching on structural elements. Equipment placement at track's end was reconsidered. ESPN crews and other equipment were repositioned or removed from immediate impact zones. Parachute materials were analyzed and improved, with research into fire-resistant fabrics and better deployment mechanisms. The entire shutdown area design was re-evaluated through the lens of extreme speed physics and catastrophic failure scenarios. Every element was examined: wall angles and materials, barrier spacing, catch net positioning, and emergency vehicle accessibility. The collective effect of these improvements has transformed professional drag racing into a significantly safer sport, though danger remains inherent to the discipline. Scott Kalitta's name now stands alongside the watershed moments in motorsport's safety history, moments where tragedy catalyzed transformation. His death, though devastating for his family and the drag racing community, sparked an immediate and comprehensive revolution in racing standards. The day after his death would have been the first elimination round in which Kalitta competed. Instead, it became a tribute. The entire Kalitta Motorsports team, including his cousin Doug Kalitta and his teammates, stood on the starting line on Scott's designated side of the drag strip. His would-be first-round opponent, Robert Hight, idled his car solemnly down the quarter mile in tribute. No words were spoken. The gesture said everything. The Kalitta family, bearing the weight of profound grief, continued to contribute to drag racing's evolution. Doug Kalitta, Scott's cousin, carried on the family's racing legacy, eventually winning NHRA championships of his own. Connie Kalitta, Scott's father, continued operating Kalitta Motorsports, the organization his father had built into one of the sport's most successful teams. Scott's wife, Kathy, and his two sons, Colin and Corey, carried his memory. The sport he loved with absolute passion changed forever because of what happened on June 21, 2008. Modern drag racing is safer because Scott Kalitta piloted that funny car to 300 miles per hour one last time. His legacy isn't merely that he was a two-time world champion. His legacy is that his death sparked the safety revolution that continues protecting drivers today. In drag racing's history, some moments change everything. Scott Kalitta's accident is one of those moments.